Welcome everyone to Phenology Tools to Inform Climate Adaptation Planning. We're so glad you're here and so glad you could be a part of the AFWA annual meeting. I'd like to introduce our workshop presenters today. Oh, but before I do, just if you could please rename yourself, your first name, last name, and organization. And to do that, you hit the three dots. And then in the chat box, if you could please say hello and put your email address in the chat box, then we'll be able to contact you and make sure you have all the handouts and information after the session ends. So with that, I will introduce our workshop presenters. Erin Posthumus leads USA National Phenology Network's outreach and engagement efforts with Nature's Notebook observers and USA NPN partners. NPN is the National Phenology Network. She is also the USA NPN's liaison to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is working with national wildlife refuges across the country to implement phenology monitoring to meet their resource management goals. Erin received her BA in environmental biology from the University of Colorado Boulder, then worked on a variety of field biology projects around the US and abroad. She first came to the USA National Phenology Network as a Peace Corps Fellow in 2010 during her graduate program at the University of Arizona's School of Natural Resources and the Environment. And in 2013, she was awarded a Master of Science for her research on wildlife species diversity at endangered red squirrel mittens. And Dr. Kathy Gerst is an ecologist conducting phenology research and developing data products with the USA NPN since 2011. In her current role, she brings together stakeholders, researchers, and agencies to ensure science is useful for the health and resiliency of people and the environment. She coordinates the delivery of data and tools to meet the needs of scientists and managers across diverse applications, including invasive species and land surface phenology. Previously, she was a liaison with the California Phenology Project, facilitating the implementation of plant phenology monitoring in California national parks. Kathy received a BS in Ecology, Behavior, and Evolution from UCLA in 2001. She completed her PhD in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology in 2011 at the University of Arizona, where she carried out research on the evolutionary ecology, reproductive biology, and physiology of desert annual plants. Broadly, she's interested in understanding how species, communities, and populations respond to a variable and changing environment. Welcome, Erin and Kathy.
Thanks, Elena, and thanks to you all for being here. We're really excited to be talking to you all today. What we're going to do is share some of the data and tools that we have available that we feel like are very useful for natural resource managers. And then we really want to hear from you all. We are very open to working with stakeholders at the USA NPN and trying to make sure that the products that we develop are most useful to different audiences, including natural resource managers. So it's a great opportunity for us to hear from you all about what would be most useful in your work for climate adaptation planning. So we'll have a lot more opportunities for you to provide feedback in the second half of the workshop. So first off, thanks for those of you who have been putting your emails and affiliations in the chat. If you're just joining us, you can continue to do that. That will be useful for us to be able to follow up with you all after the workshop with some resources. So I want to start out by sharing a Menti poll. So some of you might have used Menti in the past, but just to make sure you're all able to access it and use it, I'm going to share my screen. And so you can go to menti.com on either a phone or your computer, and then type in the code that's at the top here. And just to kind of get us started, just enter in any species that you're working on, species of concern that you deal with in your work, just to make sure that everyone's able to access and use the Menti poll. So we're going to be using it later. And again, that code is just at the top, the 3775561. All right, hopefully that, you see it. My computer was a little slow. So if you can see that, let me know. Yeah, okay. So that code at the top is just www.menti.com. And then as people enter their responses, we should be able to see them up here on the screen in our word cloud. Nothing's coming in yet, but hopefully, oh, there we go. Texas horn lizard. And you should be able to type in a couple different responses as well. And in this word cloud, if there are more than one people that report the same thing, then it'll have a different size to the words there. So a lot of different species. You can see that there are people from all across the country based on the responses. And some people putting more of a general description, threatened or endangered or at risk. We'll just give it a little bit longer for people to type in their responses. Migratory birds and brook trout. Seems like a couple people are reporting that. And amphibians is coming up too. Desert tortoise. Cool. Well, I'm going to move on from this and we can come back to look at it too as more people report in. All right, so I now want to share a video. I think I'm going to have to actually share with sound. Let me do that. And this is a video that kind of describes the USA NPN and how we work with resource managers and scientists. And I think it's a good way to kind of give you an introduction to the NPN. So watch that.
Natural disasters, there are more extreme droughts, there's more extreme weather events. There's an urgency within the climate community and climate scientists.
The USA National Phenology Network is a science and monitoring initiative that's national scale. We exist to collect, store, and share data and information about phenology. Phenology is all about when things happen. It pertains to the timing of events that occur seasonally in plants and animals.
I'm interested in how climate change is impacting our forests. With climate change, we're seeing warmer winters, we're seeing warmer springs, and we're getting this earlier bud burst in the spring. And so these leaves are coming out, and oftentimes they're at a time when these late spring freezing events can still be really damaging. So by watching changes in bud burst, we can observe how the climate is changing over time. So it's a great tracker or proxy for climate change. This is frost damage. This is pretty standard look of what freezing damage looks like. It smells like it was hit by a frost. And what probably happens... Ideally, I want to get data from tons of species. Every species is different, so the more information I can get on bud burst and leaf out across as many species as I possibly can would be ideal. I use the Nature's Notebook. We have a whole slew of volunteers called the tree spotters. Almost every day someone is going out, sometimes multiple observers a day. So that's really high quality data that I can access quite easily.
The data that have been coming in through Nature's Notebook have slowly and steadily been growing in number. Those data can be used by researchers and non-professionals for exploring patterns in how things are occurring over the course of the year, as well as changing from year to year.
Phenology happens rapidly in many places at the same time. Can we predict phenology accurately 3 days in advance, 5 days in advance, 2 weeks in advance? So in my own lab, we've been focusing on is this idea of iterative ecological forecast. We have some new information that's coming in continuously. We want to update our understanding on a closer to real-time basis. There was a question of, we're starting to see the actual green out and bud burst and early leaf. My graduate student who's making these phenology forecasts wanted to, validate what she's doing in the field. She could not move across all of these different locations in real time. Some of that large data is coming from formal observatories and observation networks, but also that community science represents a real untapped gem for what we're doing.
What we really need to do is use the army of observers that are part of the Phenology Network to help collect the data to not only build the models, but then also to validate those models. We are moving towards implementing phenol forecasts or phenological forecasting, which is a new and exciting area where we are really truly being able to deliver real-time and forecasted information directly to the hands of users who are using that to make natural resource management decisions.
A projection or a prediction about where we think buffalo grass will be green, and therefore you should go out and treat it.
One of the things I think that's fantastic about this product you launched in June is it's already giving me real-time information where, it matches what I'm seeing on the landscape, but tells me when I can go out and control invasive species buffalo grass on the land I manage.
We are sort of on the cutting edge of trying to apply new theory about how do we as scientists work with resource managers to better understand what their needs are and to more effectively and efficiently deliver the information that they need.
Through these pheno forecasts, we've started to deliver products that are seemingly valuable to decision makers and folks who are making decisions on the ground. And we're really excited to continue to grow in this direction and expand the suite of products that we can offer and really identify where is phenology information valuable and important, and in what format can we deliver that can really make a difference.
So I think that provides a nice overview of what we're doing and how we're trying to work with natural resource managers. So now I'm going to switch over to my slides. All right, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Working pattern? Okay, thanks. All right. So there are many different applications of phenology, and you saw a couple examples in the video. Obviously, there's a lot of applications for plant and pollinator interactions and other species interactions. So knowing about when nectar is available and when pollinators are active. A lot of agricultural applications as well. Wildfire, knowing when plants spring up in the spring and whether it's a really long growing season that creates a high fuel load.
Your slides are advancing.
Oh, really? Okay.
See like the
intro
slide, but it's also not in slide sharing mode.
Ah, okay. It must be on my other screen. Hold on. Let me try to reshare. Okay, I think I'm just gonna have to go through them here. Okay, you can see it. Okay, so I was just talking about some of the applications that we can use phenology for. So with wildfire season, knowing about how long the plants have been green, it creates a higher fuel load that can lead to a worse fire season. And there was even an article that came out last year that looked at, for a plant that's very common in California, the flowering of that plant is an indicator of the fuel moisture in the plant, so an indicator of fire risk. Also allergies, obviously knowing when pollen is released in plants can help us understand the timing of allergy season and the severity of it. And then also invasive plants and insect species. So in the example in the video with invasive buffalo grass, knowing about when that plant is green can inform the timing of when to spray it, which can help managers have an edge over getting out to treat that plant when it's the most effective. And then insect pests as well, knowing about the timing of things like adult emergence and knowing when you can spray a certain forest pest is informed by phenology as well. So at the USA NPN, we have really 4 main objectives: to advance science, inform decisions, communicate and connect, and then create an equitable and diverse network. And that one, informed decisions, is what we're going to really be focused on today. We're really interested in working with natural resource managers to try to create phenology data and products that are most useful. So your feedback today will really help us to inform what we're going to be doing in the future. So I wanted to really talk about 3 main types of tools and resources that we have available for you. The first is observed phenology data. So we have a program called Nature's Notebook, which was also mentioned in the video. This is a program that has over 18,000 active observers spread all across the country. We have a mix of people that are participating as individual observers, as well as people that are participating as what we call local phenology programs. So these are organizations like nature centers, botanic gardens, universities. We have a lot of national parks and wildlife refuges that all use the program as their phenology data collection platform to record information. And often these groups are trying to answer their own questions or meet their own objectives by using phenology data. We have over 22 million records that have been collected, and all of the data that are collected are available in the National Phenology Database and freely available for download. And these data have been used in over 90 publications to date, and we have a number of data products that we've created, sometimes using these data. So just to kind of give you an example of what these data look like and how they can be used by managers, we have a number of data collection campaigns. So these are focused efforts to collect information about particular species that are of interest to either scientists or natural resource managers. So one example is Nectar Connectors. This is a campaign that's a national campaign. It includes over 53 different species of nectar plants that are used by monarchs and other pollinators. And you can see on the graph here, this is what we call an activity curve. And basically what you're looking at is the proportion of yes records. And these are times when an observer went out and they said yes to seeing a certain life cycle event. In this case, it's open flowers, which is represents the nectar availability for the plants. And we've grouped the data here by genera. And there's a number of different ways you can kind of group the data in the Nature's Notebook or the visualization tool. You can look at the individual species, and then you can group by the different taxonomic levels. So here we're looking at 4 different genera of nectar plants from this year, and this is in Midwest states. So you can see that when those the data start increasing, that's showing you when people that are observing started reporting, yes, they're seeing open flowers for those different genera in the Midwest. And so the activity curves really show kind of the increase or the magnitude in when the phenology data are showing that the open flowers are visible. Another example is nectar availability for bats. So this is another effort that's focused in the Southwest in Arizona and New Mexico. looking at availability of nectar for the lesser long-nosed bat. And we're looking here at saguaro flowering represented by the green. So saguaros are the first to kind of flower of the species that are used by the bats, and then they peak in about May. And then a couple different agave species that are also used by the bats start increasing later on in the summer. And then we also have a lot of data on deciduous trees. So this is showing deciduous trees in the northeast part of the United States in the genus Acer, so the maples. And this is actually showing you a number of different years. So this is when the breaking leaf buds or the initial growth started. And this can really be used because often when deciduous trees start leafing out is when caterpillars are emerging, which are a major food source for a lot of migrating birds. So you can kind of look at this graph and see when those leaf out resources start increasing and how that might be different in different years in the Northeast. So these graphs were created in the visualization tool, which is located on the USA NPN website. And so I welcome you to go onto the Viz tool and explore and create your own graphs as well. We also have the data available in a filter data set format. So we have the Phenology Observation Portal is a way to download filter data sets for different species and years and locations. We also have a number of different data types. So the status and intensity would be just the basic data that's kind of in its raw form. And then we have a number of synthesized data sets which provide a summary in different ways. So the activity curves that we were just looking at would be under the magnitude phenometrics, which kind of shows you the proportion of when those yes records are reported. The second type of product that I wanted to tell you about is our spring indices. So these are, it's an index of when early season plants leaf out and bloom. These are based on models that were created from a data set of over 50 years of leaf out and bloom information about early season plants, including lilacs and honeysuckles. And we've taken these models and turned them into a series of maps that show you when we predict based on the local weather conditions, early season plants will leaf out and bloom. So this map here shows the leaf index, and it's actually showing the anomaly. So comparing what's happening this year to a long-term average of 1981 to 2010. And so it really allows you to see where in the country is spring arriving earlier than kind of normal or a long-term average. And so the darker red areas on the map are showing places that are 20 to 30 days ahead of what we consider to be this long-term average. And these pixels on the map are 2.5 kilometers. We have maps going back to 1980, so you can look at what happened in the past in terms of when the spring leaf out and the spring bloom arrived or were estimated to have arrived. And then we also have a short-term forecast. So you can look in the springtime and see 6 days in advance when we predict the leaf out and the bloom will arrive in each location. So we've applied the spring index in different ways, including looking at it in the context of national wildlife refuges. So we have what we call a subsite or kind of a web portal, fws.usanpn.org, that translates the spring index information for refuges. So you can click on any refuge across the country and get information about what's happening with spring at that refuge. So here's an example for Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge. So this year at that refuge, this is showing the anomaly, so how this year's spring differs from that long-term average. And you can see in that legend there in the box that over the whole refuge, if we average out when spring arrived and how it was different from the average, it was 10.7 days earlier than that long-term average. And you can click on the map and see for each pixel within the refuge what that value was. So for that one here, which I clicked on, it's 10 days early, and get some information about how this year is different from a long-term average. And for this refuge, it's actually one of the 25 or so refuges that are also collecting observational phenology data with us through Nature's Notebook. So that link there at the bottom that says visit the Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge dashboard, that actually lets you look at the real-time phenology information that they're collecting at the refuge on different plants and animals that are of interest to them. So we also wanted to look at the historical changes in the spring index over the last 100 years. And we based this on another study that we did for the National Park Service a number of years ago. So basically what we did was we were trying to look at how recent decades compare to the last 100 years. Has spring gotten earlier? Is it later in some locations? So this map shows in red the locations of refuges that are seeing much earlier springs in the recent decades than that last 100 years. And then the gray are where it's about the same. And then there's one single blue in Wyoming there where it's later in recent decades. And so we also have this available on the FWS site. And what you can do is click on a refuge and get more information about how spring has changed over the last 100 years. So here again is Canaan Valley, and you can see how the value for the average spring leaf index in the recent decades, what that date is, how that is kind of changed over the last 100 years. So this one's spring leaf is extremely early in recent decades compared to the historical range. And then it also puts the information in the context of the different flyways. So in the Atlantic flyway, we actually found that northern latitudes in the flyway are shifting to much earlier springs than those in the southern latitudes. And then the graph shows a time series of how the spring leaf out has changed over about the last 20 years, going up to 2012, which is when the data set ended that we used for that study. And other researchers have used the spring index to start thinking about how this impacts different birds. So in this paper, Mayor and colleagues looked at how the arrival of different migratory birds compares to green up or the spring index. And they found that for a number of species, they're kind of lagging behind the spring leaf out. So as spring is shifting and becoming earlier, the birds are not shifting their migration timing and they're falling behind that leaf out timing, which is, has a lot of implications for the food resources that they're able to take advantage of when they arrive to their breeding grounds. We've also done another kind of way to look at the spring index by looking at how often we see a spring like this one. So basically how typical is this year's spring? So this map shows in places where spring was early, how rare is this kind of a spring? So the darker the color, the more rare. So with the really dark green colors, those are locations where this year's spring was the earliest on record. And this is about a 40-year record. And then the purple locations are where it's been the latest spring on record. So we're interested in looking at the spring index in different ways. Right now we're considering a project where we would look at long-term projections. So I mentioned that we right now have a 6-day forecast of when we predict the spring leaf out and bloom will arrive. But we're also interested in looking even farther out. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to get some feedback on from you all today is if we do projections, how is that of interest to you? What kind of timescales are you interested in for that kind of a product? And then the third kind of product that I wanted to tell you about is what we call our pheno forecasts. So we often will start talking with stakeholders and try to figure out, what they're interested in. We collect data for them, sometimes through a campaign. We can work on models or work with existing models to develop a product such as a map. And then often we'll do a validation component where we continue to collect observed phenology data to help inform that model and improve it. So our pheno forecast, we have for 12 different species of insect pests. And we also have one invasive plant, bufflegrass, that we're predicting the phenology for. So this is a list of different species. So things like Asian longhorn beetle, bagworm, emerald ash borer. And so for each of those, we have a particular life cycle that's of interest to managers. So it might be adults, which is when they spray the trees, is when adults are emerging. It might be caterpillars, if that's when that, that insect is treated. So we have a map for each of these species. This one here is for emerald ash borer. So this is based on accumulated heat. So these are known thresholds, usually based in the cooperative extension literature, where someone has studied that species and determined that if you have this amount of accumulated heat since the beginning of the year, then that insect will undergo a life cycle change. And so we've taken that kind of that model or that threshold and used the current weather information for each location, and then given a forecast of when we predict that life cycle stage will change. So we have this map here, adult emergence will happen at 450 growing degree days, which is represented in yellow. And so we actually have a couple bins kind of leading up to that to help people get ready for that life cycle stage that's going to happen. So for each pixel on the map, you can actually get a forecast. So you can plug in your zip code and say, I want to get a notification when that species is about to transition to its next life cycle stage. And so people will get an email notification giving them a heads up about that species. We also have a campaign to help collect more information. So the graphic on the right is that notification that people get in their email saying expect adults in 2 weeks. And then you can look at the forecast map. And then we also invite people to report back. Are you actually seeing the emerald ash borers at your location? And it gives them a way to report that on our website. So just to kind of summarize, we have observed phenology data. You can use our visualization tool to explore the data that we have, or you can download filtered data sets. And we also have our status of spring maps in a variety of different formats, as well as the pheno forecasts. And all of those are available on our website. So I welcome you to chat in any questions that you have about those data and data products. And we'll do a couple more Mentipols to get some feedback. But if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to chat those in. And we can also get to those later on too. And I'll be sending out a PDF version of the slides as well. Sorry that they were a little bit small to see because the presentation mode was going onto my second screen.
Erin, we can't see the Mentipoll slide.
Yeah, I'm just about to pull those up.
Okay.
All right. All right, so a few more of you have filled in the first question there. Looks like migratory birds, regal, fritillary, desert tortoise, and brook trout, and amphibians are the top. All right, I don't think, are there any questions in the chat? No questions, okay. So let's go to the next. All right, so we want to get some feedback from you all about kind of how you're thinking about adaptation planning. So it's helpful for us to kind of learn a little bit more about the timescales that you're thinking about. So if you are doing adaptation planning, maybe creating a climate adaptation plan, or just thinking about doing wildlife management planning, what is the time scale that you're thinking about for that? And you can answer more than one of these if you're considering all of these, but it would just be helpful for us to get kind of a reference about the time scales you're thinking about. We'll just give it a little bit for people to chat in. It looks like we have a few people that have reported. All right, looks like 10 years is the most common. Just give it another few seconds for people to put in their answers. And we can also send these around as well, the results of these, if people are interested in those. All right. So 10 years looks like it's the most common, so that's interesting. All right, and then we have one more of these. So we're interested in whether you're already collecting or using phenology data. If you're not sure, then that's an option as well. And then if you want to give any more context to that, I welcome you to put that in the chat too. If there's like certain species that you're collecting data on, or maybe using phenology data from another source, that would be interesting for us to know about. Okay, so some I'm not sure. And if you have questions too about whether it is phenology data or why you're not sure, then you can chat that in as well. Are there any questions or anything in the chat, Kathy?
There is a question from Amber who's interested in using phenology data in climate change curriculum for students.
Okay. So yeah, we have a number of different resources for teaching about phenology. And we actually have a whole, on our Nature's Notebook website, a page with education activities. And it's a web page where you can filter different resources. So you can put in the education level, whether you want it to be an outdoor or an indoor activity, even like the length of time, and find a whole bunch of resources. So maybe Kathy, can you chat that in? For people?
Yeah. And Erin, for breakout groups, are we still thinking 4 to 6 people?
Yeah, I think so.
Per group, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sonia didn't have a question, but a comment that she's using gridded phenology data and species distribution models.
Oh, okay. What kind of gridded phenology data?
Mm-hmm.
Sonia, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
One specific example, I'm working on the distribution of potential habitat for northern Idaho ground squirrel, which is one of our species of green surfing endemic for Idaho. We use the start of the season timing to index when we might have potential food and the emergence time for these species during their active season. And so I'm really interested in looking at, so we've got some changes in bioclimatic variables forecasted for mid-century. And because of the phenology component, I'd like to see some forecasts, for mid-century to see how that might influence our distribution predictions for the future.
Oh, that's really great to hear. So what was the gridded phenology data that you're using? I didn't catch that.
NDVI remotely sent.
Okay, yeah.
Cool.
There could be great opportunities to use our modeled spring index gridded product also to see if you get similar or different results. And we can share more information about that.
That's excellent. Too.
Cool. And I also am going to chat in, maybe while we're in the breakout sessions, a few different handouts that we have that they go over some of the information from the slides as well. So Kathy or I can chat those in. So what we wanted to do next was 2 different breakout sessions to allow you guys to think about kind of how you would use some of this information and maybe things that are missing that we don't have that you might want to see. So we have the first question. I'm going to put it in the chat here. We're interested in particular about the spring indices. So how you might use information about the start of spring or the length of the spring season. So whether this onset of spring is kind of getting longer in terms of the timing between like the leaf out and the bloom. And then thinking about other spring related products that might be of interest. So things like that long-term projection. How would you use that information? So could you see if you knew that spring was going to be 2 weeks earlier than it normally is, what kind of activities would that inform? So we're going to give you 10 minutes in a breakout session with, I think, 5 or 6 people to kind of discuss that question. And then we'll come back and talk about it as a group. So Elena, if you could put people in breakout sessions, you should still be able to see, oops, I think I chatted, let me chat to everyone. So here's the question there in the chat, and we'll also send it out as a message to the breakout rooms in case you can't see the chat once you get into the breakout rooms.
Hey, Erin, I have 8 breakout rooms set up.
Okay.
How long will they have in their breakout rooms?
10 minutes.
Okay, so 10 minutes. If you haven't done a Zoom breakout room before, you're going to see an invitation to join your room. Just accept that invitation and it will zoom you off like a Harry Potter magic spell into this separate room. So here we go.
Okay, so is there a way for us to message everyone?
I can broadcast a message to everyone.
Okay, yeah, if you want to just, the thing that I put there, how would you use information about the start of spring? If you could send that out to everybody just to make sure they can see it.
And should I be joining breakout room 1 or just staying here?
I got the invitation, I just said no or later, but I think we could, but I don't know if we'll be able to get around to all of them, so.
Yeah, the hard part is I could make one of you the host, and at that point you can go and jump in and out of all the different groups if you want to do that.
I don't think it's necessary. Well,
yeah, we were talking about how it kind of makes it awkward sometimes because you show up in the room and then people feel like they have to like repeat themselves and it kind of disrupts the conversation, but I don't know if you have a different opinion about it.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
Setting my timer here.
Okay.
Great presentation, Erin, as always.
Oh, thanks. I was really bummed that the slides wouldn't, it was like just showing up on my second screen and I couldn't choose to share like one versus the other. So
yeah, I always have that problem when I have 2 screens going during a Zoom.
Yep. I'm actually going to run to the bathroom now. We're in the breakout room.
It's time to do it. one person, she was there all alone in a group.
Oh no. Was it the first room?
No, it's like the fourth one.
Oh no.
So Kathy, did you already chat in all of the handouts? Oh yeah.
I chatted in the Pheno forecast one and the NPN one.
Okay.
Do you think we should do any of the others? Maybe the decision-making one?
Yeah, I think that one and then the spring indices one.
Okay, I'll take care
I have
of that.
them. Okay, you want to do it?
Sure.
I guess the 10-year response for adaptation planning makes sense if a lot of the state wildlife action plans are done on a 10-year schedule.
Yeah. It was quite a range though. I mean, 10 years was the most, but
yeah,
the others had pretty high.
Yeah.
The more than 20 years, more than 30 years.
So they're at 5 minutes now.
Okay.
I usually give them like a 3-minute warning.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Once I end everything, Zoom gives them 60 seconds to come back. And
okay.
Then
And I guess for the recording, maybe we can edit this part out. If we post it. Are you doing another workshop today, Kathy?
Yeah, the responsible recreation one. What about you?
Yeah, I'm doing the Padlets to Pods. It's like digital education tools.
Cool. Yeah. I think I'll skip the spring index or the Mark and Toby meeting.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any reason to.
Yeah, my workshop is at the same time as that.
I'm going to give them the 3-minute warning now.
Okay.
I like seeing which groups are having really hearty conversations. They'll be the last group to come back.
Say that again?
I like seeing the groups that are having really good conversations. They'll be the last one to come in.
Yeah, right. So then for the second breakout group, do you think, Kathy, should we resort them into different groups or put them back in the same group?
Oh, I'm not going to remember if they're, I didn't write down who was in which group.
Oh, okay, well then that's great. That'll decide it for us. Well, it'll resort, right? It'll just re-randomize. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. And Erin, are you going to have them report back just group by group now?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll take note.
Yeah, I don't know if we can, how many groups are there total?
There are 8.
Okay, well, we might be able to hear a little bit from all of them, but I think just have people volunteer.
I'm going to close these.
Okay. All right, looks like most people have gotten pulled back in. Great, so we would love to hear about what you guys discussed. So does anyone want to volunteer and maybe unmute yourself as a representative from your group and tell us about any ideas that you came up with for ways that you might be able to use the start of spring indices? And you could also raise your hand. Okay, looks like Cindy Simpson?
Yeah, hi, this is Cindy. I'm in North Carolina. There were only 2 of us in the breakout room. And so we only really had 2 points. So for migratory birds, knowing that phenological shift as to when the species are going to be making those movements, either going or coming from winter to spring breeding, or from spring overwintering to go to breeding territory, whatever that may be, it would be good because you need to manage landscapes to provide the forage and the cover that they need. And then in North Carolina, for us, our agency is responsible for managing land, and a lot of it needs prescribed fire in order to maintain the natural communities. And so knowing those changes in spring emergence, whether it be insects or ground nesting birds or plant blooming or whatever, could become significant as you plan for those prescribed burns, because burns are planned in advance in order to make sure you have the manpower and the funding and the permits in hand, and you've identified your windows of opportunity. So that's extremely important to know that information. So that's what we came up with.
That's great. Yeah. So when you're thinking about planning the prescribed burns, how far in advance are you typically planning?
We're looking at the 1 year mark. So sometimes a little less than a year, sometimes just a little more than 12 months, maybe at 14 months. Part of that pre-planning is identifying the blocks, which landscapes need to be burned, because you've got them on rotation and cycles. Mm-hmm. And so, picking that out, and then doing the site visits to take a look at, what is actually on the landscape that might have changed since the last time it was burned, and then making sure that you sit down and start planning for it. So if they go out and they find that, here's this plant that needs prescribed fire, and we've got these new populations that have spread, and it's a spring emergent and going to set seed, you want to make sure you don't burn it again when it's during that seeding period, because you might be burning up the reproductive year for it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share back from their group? I don't see any. You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
I'd be happy to share a bit. Okay. So in my group, there was discussion about, among other things, the management of invasive species, and one example was with cheatgrass in the Southwest, and being able to better understand when fire would be expected from encroaching cheatgrass, and the phenology data, how that can be applied to the management there. There was discussion of the European green crab in Alaska. There was also discussion about better planning for doing plantings around conservation easements at water bodies in Minnesota. So all of these were examples of using the data for those purposes. For myself, it was how can we involve students, particularly high school students, in projects where they're being mentored, in conjunction with their teachers, non-formal educators, and other professionals to help gather data that is meaningful and useful for conservation efforts.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
That's interesting. Can you say anything more about the planting around, what was it, water bodies? How spring relates to that?
I could, but not nearly as well as the person in my group from Minnesota. Sorry.
Maybe if that person wants to say anything more.
Yeah.
That was me. This is Heidi Rantala. It was just related to, it was actually related to scheduling our work. But we do manage a lot of land in Minnesota. Our agency manages about 5 million acres, actually. Most of it's forest, but a lot of it is in conservation easements or related to restoration work, stream and lake shore restoration. And so that would guide the timing of plantings.
Okay. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. All right, I don't think there are any other raised hands. Anyone else? It looks like Bruce, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I put the video on. Sorry. I'm Bruce Rittenhouse with the Bureau of Land Management in our headquarters office, and we talked a little bit about also invasive species, but we also talked about a little bit about human perspectives as well, and from like focus a little bit on the fall season as with recreationists and hunters. Seeing changes in animal migration, and for my example was with the BLM was that we get a lot of input from hunters who go to their favorite hunting grounds and they don't see the animals anymore because they haven't moved down from the mountains yet because of longer fall seasons, warmer fall seasons, and I also looked at it from a standpoint of how we can, we as in the BLM, can make decisions to, when we have uses of public land such as grazing permittees, how we can use phenological data to help support when and where we put livestock out on public rangelands. Because if we're seeing that a permit is specifically for one time of the year and now that grass is already cured out and dried out, it's not providing that forage value for the time that those cows or sheep are out there on the public lands for their regulated grazing permits. So those are some of the issues that we built in some of the human perspectives as well.
Cool. Yeah, we actually are, we're thinking about a fall product similar to the spring index, but that would look at, it would be kind of colored leaves, a change in that, but it would be based on temperature changes. I don't know if Kathy, if you want to describe it better than that, but.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest in creating or delivering a fall index similar to the spring index, but a lot of species in the fall are responsive to accumulation of cold temperatures. And so we're working to look at the data in our database and see if we can come up with sort of a index of fall that would work over the whole United States based on accumulation of cold starting in the summertime, and then thinking about ways that could be used to assess growing season length, and sort of just provide a metric for when conditions have been met to sort of be an indicator of fall. So we're working on it. Hopefully we'll have something on our site by next year.
Cool, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
There is another component on habitat restoration. In our case, working on habitat restoration for pollinators and the eastern migratory monarch butterfly. We have noticed a phenology mismatch with the host plant for the migratory monarch butterfly, which is the milkweed, different species of Asclepias. But there is a mismatch that it did just happen this year. And we are considering that it'll be really important for us to keep in mind that this is happening due to climate change. And we would like to use this tool to determine how we can just create a diverse mix of plants that can help us to do habitat restoration and ensure that not only the monarchs, but all pollinators will find the nectar and host plants that they need throughout the year.
That's great. Yeah, we actually are working on a proposal right now for the South Central CASC, the Climate Adaptation Science Center, that would focus on that very thing, like looking at the timing of nectar availability, flowering, and then also seeding of nectar plants in the South Central region to see if we could kind of give better advice to people that are doing plantings about what species they might want to plant to kind of meet different requirements for pollinators. So that's great to know that it's of interest in the Northeast as well.
Rebecca,
we would
can
use
I
it all the
ask
time. Sure.
Rebecca, are the monarchs coming earlier before the plants are flowering, or is it the opposite pattern that you're seeing?
This year, during the spring migration, which is when they are coming back from Mexico, they arrived earlier and there were not enough Asclepias on the ground for them to lay their eggs.
Oh, okay.
So there was an issue there. Yes. So they were not blooming, enough. So I guess the temperatures were a little bit low this spring. However, you guys are saying, based on your data, that this was an early spring, right? But here in Texas, we didn't see that happening with the Asclepias, the native Asclepias. So it was kind of interesting. We had a whole internal conversation about it, and I can share with you guys some of our answers to that puzzle. Yeah, if it is helpful for your proposal. Yeah, we would love to see that data.
Yeah, that would be great to talk further with you. Yeah, our spring map shows that most of Texas was early. And that is, it's kind of tricky for the southeastern states because there's a certain threshold for when the spring index requirements are met. And so if you have, a couple early heat waves in January, you might meet those requirements and then it might cool off after that. And so it's not always directly linked to every species. And we started to look at how the spring index kind of lines up with some native species, but there's definitely more work to be done there with linking to things like the nectar plants as well. So yeah, that's interesting to hear that it was later for those plants this year. Anyone else want to share? We probably have time for one more. Okay, so the next question, we're going to put you in new breakout rooms now. And now we want to hear about, if there are any other phenology forecasts, so thinking about the kind of forecasts like we have for emerald ash borer and other insect pests. We also have a forecast for invasive bufflegrass that shows the green up. Are there other species for which a forecast would be useful for you? And maybe it's not a single species, but it's a group. But you can discuss that in your groups and then we'll get back together and discuss as a bigger group. Thanks, Elena, for posting that. So I was just looking at the the spring leaf and bloom maps, the anomaly maps, and a lot of the northern part of Texas, bloom was actually like more on time, whereas the leaf out was early. So maybe it's like the difference between those things. Like they got cold weather after the leaf index had triggered. Oh, you're muted.
It's so tricky at lower latitudes too. Like, you know, what's like the warm temperatures are kind of to be expected, but it doesn't necessarily mean an advancement.
Yeah. Oh, I think I keep chatting things directly to people.
Oh, instead of to the whole group?
Yeah, it's like whatever you last chatted, it like goes back to that, which I guess makes sense. But luckily Elena chatted it to everyone in their groups. Put it up here just in case. Are we close to the 3 minutes?
It's just we're at 4 minutes.
Okay. We should have about 10 minutes left. That's good.
Yeah. I think the timing worked out really nicely.
Yeah. I mean, it's too bad we didn't get to hear from everybody.
Yeah.
But we could maybe do a follow-up survey and like get a few more responses.
Yeah, I was trying to sort of see if, or think about if 3 hours would have been better or not.
Yeah, it's just hard to so much time on Zoom for people. There's so many other workshops.
Yeah, I was like, I think people are more likely to sign up for shorter things.
Yeah. Hey, welcome back. So we'd love to hear from you about what you talked about. If there are any particular forecasts that are of interest to you or species that you would like to have a forecast for. So if anyone wants to, you can either raise your hand or just unmute and share back from your group.
Hey, Erin, this is Jason from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So I'll take a crack at going first. Hey, long time.
Yeah.
You know, so we actually struggled with this one for a bit because we realized that it's, you know, how do you prioritize first? I mean, with all the species that you're monitoring, how do you pick? It's almost a chicken and egg problem. You know, you have all these citizen scientists that you have that can go out and get data, but really what are the priorities that you need to be gathering that information on? So we started thinking about a couple of different things. And the first one really is the need to be able to talk directly with partners, working with a state or a national wildlife refuge to figure out what the species are that they want to manage. Invasives and other non-native species was important, as well as other pollinators came up as something that we were thinking about, particularly on the monarch side. That was something that one of the people in our group really said was a highly important species. So it's not just those species then, but what are the species that they rely on or otherwise interact with?
Cool. Yeah, we're actually we're thinking about some pollinator forecasts. Maybe Kathy can say more about that.
Yeah, you know, Erin presented, we got started with our pheno forecasts because there was all these simple models out there for forest pests, agricultural pests, simple growing degree day models. And we got so much positive feedback on those, we started thinking, well, we could do this for butterflies and bees and other insects that are responsive to for their development. And so we are exploring ideas of making predictive forecasts for key pollinators. And I think in the coming year, we'll do more stakeholder engagement to figure out what would be the most desirable species and areas to be working with. So, you know, I encourage everyone to reach out if you have thoughts along that. And, you know, obviously monarchs and plants that monarchs are dependent on are high on the list.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
Looking forward to it.
Does anyone else want to share? Oh, Holly Ettinger.
Yeah, hi there. Just bring forward from the group I was in. We were just chatting about aquatics. I'm an aquatic biologist, and we had a good discussion about how this might be able to be expanded maybe into aquatics, the effects of that for the species amphibians and the native fisheries, and differences how we deal with temperature and the chemistries, and but just that might be something to look into, either as a direct link to this work or perhaps tearing off for aquatics.
Yeah, we actually, we worked with a fish and wildlife biologist a number of years ago on mayflies, burrowing mayflies on the upper Mississippi. And he at the time was trying to figure out whether these models predicting emergence would work. They're based on water temperature. It was really tricky there because of the way the water cycles in the lock and dams, and it was really difficult to figure out how to do those forecasts. But I think there's potential for other systems to try to do maybe emergence models for other aquatic species. So that's good to know that would be a priority.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Looking for raised hands. It's like, Sonia, are you unmuted?
I am. I was in Holly's group. Just to kind of expand on that, we kind of had a question, does this phenology network address things like the timing of runoff and peaks of water runoff and changes from snowmelt to water dominated systems, or dewatering of streams, or that kind of potential later in the season beyond just the temperature and chemistry? Because my experience with information has been on the botanical side, which has been very useful, but we just had a basic question if that was in the breadth of, or in this realm.
We currently do not make phenology information on non-biological organisms available, or we don't collect information on things that are not plants or animals. But there has been a lot of interest over the years in things like snow melt and the timing of stream flow. And so, it's not outside the question. I think that if we had a partner that wanted to work with us to develop those ideas and how we could implement models on the timing of more hydrological processes, we'd be open to.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about like ice on, ice off on lakes and how that would be of interest. And yeah, we've kind of stayed away from adding on those kind of questions into our Nature's Notebook protocols because there are a lot of other organizations that do record that information, but we're right now looking into adding some drought questions about kind of at the site level, what is the status? Is it like very dry to very wet at your site? So we are thinking about that stuff. Yeah, we just have a couple minutes left. Does anyone else want to share back? We're also, we'll be following up with you all by email, and we're hoping to include a short survey, and so anyone that didn't get a chance to share can maybe report back a little bit more on their groups on what you talked about. But does anyone, maybe one more person, want to share? Don't see any raised hands.
Okay, twist my arm.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, so a few things that really struck me in our small group was again related to the non-living factors and also actions by agencies and behaviors of the people, right, and how these tie in with the kind of data collected, and so one of the people in our group had said that data on particular plants, and I didn't get a list of the names that he listed, but were of interest to help determine burning practices. So, is burning done in summer versus winter, and when should they be recommending burns? There was also Brian, who was also in our group, said, for him, he looked at this through the needs of law enforcement. And an example there would be data on fish in general, but for example, when will spawning happen, and would we anticipate it changing, and how will that impact law enforcement?
Well, that's really interesting.
So for me as an educator, you know, we're always looking for ways to tie in the bigger picture, you know, across well, the ecosystem and social and political concerns and actions that we can take, stewardship actions. And so, you know, having, for example, a team of students role playing these different interest groups, say the angler, the game warden, the biologist, each presenting their point of view and working with the same data and then interpreting it in different ways and presenting it as what I'm looking for. And so that was really helpful to hear these ideas about the non-living, you know, timing data, as well as how it relates to human behavior and our management decisions.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing back. So we will follow up by email. We'll have a copy of the slides and the Menti polls, and have a little survey so you can fill in any of the other stuff that you talked about in your groups. But thank you so much for your feedback. Really, we want to listen to what you all need, because we're going to be doing our planning for next year and upcoming years in a couple weeks. And so we can actually start thinking about, you know, products and things that you need, and actually start working on that. So it's really good to hear priorities from this group. And thank you all for sharing. So can we save the chat log before we close?
I got screenshots of all